All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining tonight. My name is Danielle Del Sol. I'm Executive Director of the Preservation Resource Center of New Orleans, and we're excited to welcome you tonight for a presentation on the fortified system, which now that we are squarely in hurricane season, many of us have questions about, many of us are considering whether that's a good option for our home or business. And this is very much preservation related because we need strong roofing systems and ways to protect our historic structures so that they don't flood or, incur any other damage. So we're excited to have two people who are experts because this is what they do all day, every day. Alex Carey and Mary Ewer, they are here. They are on the Fortified team and they're here to present with us tonight. So I'm going to introduce them in just a moment. They're going to present about what Fortified is, what it means for Louisianans now that we have the new tax credit passed. And so they're going to give us the whole lowdown, present to us. After that, we're going to hear from a few of the people at Green Coast Enterprises. They're going to tell us a little bit about what it's been like using Fortified on the ground here in New Orleans. So I'm going to introduce our speakers tonight. Alex and Mary work for the Fortified team of the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, providing communities across the nation with dedicated experts. They collaborate with active and potential Fortified program participants to bring sustainable and resilient construction practices into vulnerable communities. So Alex Carey, before joining the IBHS, she worked in the home building industry for over 20 years and is now involved in leadership roles at the local, state, and national level, including as an NAHB national delegate. Alex is a licensed home builder in Alabama and recently completed construction on her own fortified old home in coastal Alabama, so not too far from us here in New Orleans. Mary previously served as the regional manager of the field staff for APA, the Engineered Wood Association, and a consulting structural engineer working on commercial design projects and specializing in wood design. She earned her Master of Science in Civil Engineering from the University of Nebraska and currently resides in Baltimore, Maryland. So Alex and Mary, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to try to share my screen here, so bear with me real quick while we do that.
And to be clear, while she's doing that, I am Mary, she is Alex. We happen to be in the same place at our headquarters this week, so it's a little unusual, but so you can keep us straight.
All right, can everybody see, can you see the screen? Just making sure you're looking at our research center there. Great, okay. So yes, I am Alex Carey, and you heard my background. So I was a home builder, and I was introduced to Fortified actually when I was building homes with Habitat for Humanity about 10 years ago. And since then have really been able to experience a whole lot, both applying the program and teaching folks from all different levels about fortified construction. The first thing I'm going to do is talk a little bit background-wise about IBHS, just so you have some context on what our organization does and who we are. So it is the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, and we are basically a trade organization for the insurance industry, funded 100% by the property insurance and reinsurance industry to help reduce risk. So we are a nonprofit. This is our research center, which is where we are today in Richburg, South Carolina. And Mary's going to give you a little bit of an in-depth sort of view a little bit later in her part of the presentation about the research center. But we are able to create an experiment with all the hazards you currently see on the screen. So we do full-scale testing we are able to construct and move into that big concrete box you see behind in the background there, up to 130-mile-per-hour winds. We are able to create real world hail and apply that to structures. We can produce up to 8 inches of rain and apply it to structures as well and see what happens once we introduce it into the wind stream. And we also do a lot of wildfire research where we're able to introduce embers into the wind stream and see how that interacts with the built environment. We do a lot of roof research. And the reason for that is that the roofs are the most vulnerable part of your home, and they are the most commonly damaged and the least inspected by codes departments. So that's a really critical piece that the insurance industry would love to help you as homeowners or contractors reduce your losses. So since 2015, I think this number has actually increased because we've had quite a few in the last year, but there's been over 112 separate weather disasters that are in the billion-dollar losses, meaning that the insurance industry has paid over billions of dollars. And so what they are interested to do is try to bring that number down and keep people in their homes and reduce the amount of losses that both they and homeowners and communities experience every single year. So we'll talk a little bit about code first. Code is very important, and Louisianians, you are very fortunate to have a pretty robust code. Recently, the 2021 was just adopted by the state of Louisiana, which means that a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about today are already being adopted by code, and they're starting to be enforced here. You'll notice that the older codes, if you look in the bottom of the screen, there's a pretty good swath, and this is from Hurricane Harvey. And you'll notice that the older homes were very, very vulnerable and did not do well. There were not very good codes back then, if they were codes at all, and they were enforced not very, very sporadically, not consistently. And you'll notice as we get up into the later years, the 2017 house there on the left did very, very well. That's also the one at the top left of your screen. The one thing that, again, that was the most vulnerable was the roof. And you'll see that the roof is missing. That is not the roof cover. That is actually the underlayment. And so that roof is vulnerable. And that is, again, where we see most damage, even with strong, well-enforced codes, because it's just not inspected as much as everything else. So that's where we're going to talk a lot about the roof today. Traditionally, code really focused on life safety, making a building able to survive an event. More recently, and what Fortified focuses on specifically is on top of code, it's a little bit above code, we're looking at property protection as well. So not only are you going to be safer, but you're also going to have a better shot of having a limited amount of damage, which is going to protect your belongings as well. So I wanted to just do a quick, I'm not going to get into the weeds of this, but I did want to share that we do have a document that compares what has currently been adopted by Louisiana and what is enforced by Fortified. And there, for the most part, most of the differences are very, very minimal, and they are very inexpensive. So what is being enforced by code right now is just it's whisper close to what we're going to be talking about today with Fortified. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of that. The first level is roof, and Mary's going to get into the weeds on that a little bit later. But it's focusing all about the roof. This is a really prime opportunity for existing homeowners, and speaking about preservation and preserving existing structures, this is where it's at. Getting the roof strengthened, and especially during the re-roofing time, when you can actually give your home a better shot or your structure a better shot at surviving the next big storm. We'll get into the silver and gold levels later, but there are different levels to Fortified. And again, the code is very, very close in all the levels to actually what Fortified is. I'm going to give a couple of examples where we've had real world successes with Fortified. Hurricane Sally, I don't know how many of you out there experienced anything in the Hurricane Sally that came through in 2020. I actually live in Baldwin County, Alabama, which the eye wall went directly over my house. And the tricky part about Sally is that it was very slow moving. So we had 110, 120 miles per hour winds. My house, I sat in the eye wall for about 6 or 7 hours with winds of 110, 120. Significance of that is that with those winds and all the rain that comes with it, that is a lot of buffering that house with all that wind and rain. And so it really is a true test of how good, how well your house is constructed, and particularly your roof. We ended up having about 17,000 fortified homes. You'll see all those dots, those blue and black dots on the screen are all fortified homes. And then those darker orange colors are the highest winds. So a lot of those homes were subjected to those winds. And out of those homes, we had actually over 95% that had little to no damage. And about 1% of those actually had fortified related damages. So that's a very, very small number out of those 17,000 that had any damage at all. I want to mention here, though, is that we're not trying to eliminate damage. It's not possible to necessarily eliminate all damage, but we definitely want to reduce that damage. And the intention is to keep people in their homes so that, or when you come back from evacuation or come out of a storm shelter, your house is still there and hopefully dry, and you're able to walk in and continue living, resume your life more quickly. So a couple of examples of that. This was actually an existing structure, that the house in the middle of the screen there. And that house was a retrofit. We actually have quite a robust grant program in Alabama, which is what the Louisiana program is modeled after. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. But this was retrofitted through that grant program, and the rest of the homes in that neighborhood were not. So those blue tarps you see, I know that everyone out there is probably quite familiar with this scene. But the houses with the blue tarps, those homeowners were not able to stay in their homes and were moving their belongings out to the street that were all saturated and damaged. And this gentleman was able to house, the gentleman that lived in that house was actually housing some of his neighbors because his roof stayed intact through Sally. We had a couple of really good results from roofers and homeowners and home builders. This particular builder had 2,000 homes that were in the path of Sally that he had constructed since 2014, and he didn't have a single callback. So he had no homeowners that had damage enough to call him and complain. Now, going a little closer to home for you guys, this was a house that was constructed on Grand Isle by a builder that's now doing fortified 100% down there. This was a fortified gold home, so it was new construction. And it, those of you that you probably all know, but that it got subjected to 160-mile-per-hour winds, direct hit from Ida. And it was in perfect condition, and we actually had recovery workers that were staying in that house. They brought in some potable water and got a generator, and they were living in that house. When going in that house, you'd never know that a hurricane actually hit. And for those of you that didn't make it out to Grand Isle, most of the island looked like that house back behind it. So the homes that were constructed to code and fortified on the island fared extremely well, and you'd never know a hurricane came through. And the last example I'll give you is actually from Ida again. And these two developments were actually constructed by the same developer. The one on the left was done several years prior. The one on the right was the first fortified commercial in Louisiana, and actually was the impetus for our fortified multifamily program. The one on the left is still not in use today. The one on the right was not quite complete, about 95% finished when Ida hit, and they had such little damage. They only lost 2 weeks in their construction. They had a little siding damage and a few damage to the air conditioning units, but otherwise, had people been living in this, they would have been able to come back from evacuation and resume their life right away. They would have been a little hot because of the lack of power, obviously, but they would have been able to be in their homes. So we have now, excuse me, we have over 50,000 actually now nationally, and about 50% of that was designated in the last 2 years. And Louisiana is on track to really build those numbers up. There's a lot of folks that are interested in the program right now. And a lot of that's been modeled, and some of the legislation I'll speak to a little bit later is all modeled after the Alabama legislation and grant program, which is now leading with over 40,000 of those designations. Mississippi's going on about 500 right now, so they're coming up. I'm going to hand it over to Mary, and she's going to walk you through a little bit more in detail about the program itself.
Thank you, Alex. Like Alex said, I'm going to get a little bit more into the weeds, talk about some of the science behind the program, as well as some of the requirements. So where we're going to start is a quick tour of our research center in Richburg, South Carolina. Here you see a roof farm on the left where we test shingles, and this is our main test chamber. Those fans, like Alex said, can create 130-mile-an-hour winds. We also test and collect hail and are able to recreate lifelike hail in the lab. And we're the only facility where it's known that we test how wildfire interacts with the built environment. So trying to figure out how to reduce wildfire risk as well as that wind-driven rain. For Hurricane Sally, so much water came. We don't just work in the lab. We also go out after events to observe the damage, see if we can recreate it in the field and in the lab, make sure that what we're finding in the lab matches what's happening in the field. So this is one of my favorite videos. This house didn't have proper anchorage of its roof to its walls, and that whole roof blew right out the doors. So there's a lot of science behind the program we're going to talk about, and I'm extra enthusiastic about the research center after having spent the day there doing all sorts of fun stuff. So we didn't get to blow anything down today, but maybe tomorrow. So one of the main things we study are sealed roof decks. This is just another example of a test in the lab. This is a duplex built side by side. Same house. On one side, there's a sealed roof deck. On the other side, there isn't. Sealed roof decks prevent water intrusion into your home when the roof cover fails, because we assume that roof cover is at some point going to fail. So you'll see here as one side blows up, there's tape on the seams of the OSB on one side and not on the other. And we're pummeling this house with rain to see what the effects are. The only differences in this house is that one side has a sealed roof deck and the other side doesn't. Here you see water coming in through lights, through all of the seams of the OSB, roof sheathing, through bathroom fans, all of the fixtures let lights in. There you can see that this is the unsealed side, or we wouldn't be able to see the light quite like that. Coming into the kitchen here. What it's doing is soaking all of that insulation in the attic. And what that leads to is very heavy ceilings and very heavy insulation that leaves the home looking like this after an event. And unfortunately, I would guess many of you have experienced this in the past. When we step over to the other side of the house, you'll see a really stark difference. This side of the house stayed totally dry, and people could walk in and sit down on that couch and stay dry. So that little step of sealing the roof deck is so very important. And for those of you in Louisiana, specifically in the coastal areas that we would call hurricane areas, sealed roof deck is now part of your building code. So that's one of the advantages that you guys have. It's something I highly recommend anywhere in the country, but for a lot of you, it's already built into your code. So if we take that sealed roof deck even a step further, and we had actual adjusters come in and look at the damage on this house, on the sealed roof deck side, the damage was about $6,000. On the unsealed side, it was about $19,000. So that's a really big difference. Basically, on the sealed roof deck side, they had to come in and replace the roof. Had to do very little work, where on the unsealed side, as you saw, all the furniture would have needed replaced, and the ceilings and the insulation. So it's a big savings following an event. So we keep mentioning the roof, and it's for a reason, because up to 90% of claims after storms include damage to the roof. So the roof is where we always want to start when we're building resiliently. It's where you can make the single biggest impact on any structure, no matter what. So we don't just study the roof. What we do is we look at how we expect homes to fail. So here we have an expected sequence of damage and how we see structures repeatedly fail during high wind, both in the lab and in the field. First thing that goes is your roof cover, your soffits, your fascia. Next, you get your wall cover, your siding. Then your roof sheathing and roof structure go. And finally, you get a total collapse. And so we have seen that, and that will repeat itself over and over, that those are the ways that the structure will fail. And it's important to keep those in mind and to know that background, because that helps understand why the program is set up the way that it is. So we're going to jump into the Fortified program a little bit now. So we actually have 3 standards within Fortified. Fortified Home, which is what I'm going to focus on today and what we're focusing on today. We also have Fortified Commercial and Fortified Multifamily. So Fortified Home applies to single-family homes, duplexes, or townhomes. Fortified Multifamily would apply to apartments or townhomes that are being built to rent, condos, any small mixed-use buildings. And then commercial, a good example of that is the hotel in Orange Beach, Alabama, Gulf Shores Park, that you see up there in the picture. The programs all have very similar technical requirements. The process is slightly different. We aren't getting into process a ton today, but just it's important to be aware of that. So let's watch this quick video that gives a good overview of Fortified, and then we'll dig in a little bit more to all of them.
Year after year, severe storms along the coast and
I'm going to pause. Are you guys hearing sound, Danielle?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. I wanted to make sure I didn't leave you sitting for 2 minutes in silence.
far inland prove just how vulnerable homes, businesses, and communities are when it comes to natural disasters. To help prevent further destruction, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, known as IBHS, created the Fortified programs. Specific design and construction standards give home and business owners options to better protect their buildings against hurricanes, hailstorms, low-level tornadoes, and severe thunderstorms. A strong quality control component ensures owners are getting the protection they deserve. There are several Fortified programs, all based on objective, science-based building techniques. This video focuses on the Fortified Home program, which addresses the natural hazard posing the biggest risk in a specific area. The construction standards can be used to build a new home or upgrade an existing home. Using data from more than 20 years of storm damage investigations in the field by IBHS and other experts, along with data from laboratory testing at the IBHS Research Center, Fortified Home provides a uniform set of superior building standards, standards that are stronger than most state building code requirements. Homeowners and builders work with Fortified Home evaluators throughout the construction or retrofitting process to make sure they achieve the desired level of disaster protection that best fits their budget. The roof, a home's first line of defense against Mother Nature, provides a comprehensive roof system designed to keep both wind and water out. A Fortified roof features a wind-driven rain management system for advanced protection against water damage. It also provides superior wind uplift resistance by using ring shank nails, which provide double the strength of nails used on traditional homes. The silver level adds extra protection by strengthening building openings, such as windows and doors, to keep out wind, water, and flying debris. The gold level designation ensures the house is tied together and has what engineers call a continuous load path. This means the roof is tied to the walls are tied to the floors, and the house is tied to the foundation. The continuous load path helps the home to stand strong when high winds try to tear it apart. After a certified third-party evaluator verifies all upgrades and critical construction details are complete, homeowners receive a designation certificate with a unique ID number that is valid for 5 years. Fortified Home provides cost-effective, consistent, and defined structural upgrades. These science-based construction practices reduce the risk of damage from extreme weather events and deliver meaningful value to homeowners. That is why Fortified has been endorsed by local, state, and federal government agencies and is being adopted by builders and contractors at all price points. For a complete description of Fortified Home benefits and requirements, visit disastersafety.org/fortified. Fortified works. It truly is the national standard for resilient construction.
So that's a really handy video that gives a really good overview. We're going to dig into a few more details. Don't want to start that again. The first thing to talk about are what structures are eligible for Fortified Home. Fortified Home can be used on both new and existing homes. It can be used for single-family detached homes, duplexes, townhouses, and even manufactured homes. There are some eligibility requirements as you move into those, but there are a lot of structures that are eligible. What aren't eligible are any home on a dry stack foundation. You guys are going to encounter this a lot, so it's an important thing to be aware of. If your home sits on a dry stack foundation, it's not eligible for Fortified without a retrofit to the foundation that includes an engineer. Also, mixed-use buildings and commercial buildings aren't eligible for Fortified Home. They would be eligible for Fortified Commercial, and multi-unit residential buildings or condos or apartments would fit into the Fortified multifamily standard. And like I said, those standards are similar. The process is a little bit different. So we're not talking about those in great detail today. So we cannot overstate the importance of doing an initial eligibility check to make sure that your foundations aren't dry stack. What dry stack means is it can be blocks, it can be bricks, it can be CMU, but they're just stacked on top of each other without any reinforcing or grout between them. If that is the case, those homes aren't eligible for a Fortified designation because while we always want to start with the roof, it doesn't do a lot of good to put a Fortified roof on a building that is in no way attached to its foundation. And unfortunately, this is something we see quite often. Within Fortified, there are two geographically appropriate regions, Fortified Home Hurricane and Fortified Home High Wind. For you, hurricane is essentially everything south of I-10. That's correct, right, Alex? For the most part. Alex is much closer to you guys geographically. High wind would be everything north. So there are a few differences in the requirements for the program. The most notable one being that for Fortified Silver, anything that gets a hurricane designation needs opening protection. We don't require that in the high wind areas. So when we look at Fortified Home Hurricane, which is what we're going to focus on for the most part, with Fortified Roof, what we do is we develop and install a roof system that's designed to keep the roof on and water out. We talked about for Silver, we go to things that what we call damage amplifiers. So garage doors are a spot that in high wind events, we see very frequent failures. And those failures lead to further failures of the house, because what happens is once a garage door fails, not only when the wind blows on a house with a closed garage door, it's sucking on 3 of the 4 walls. It's blowing on one wall, but on all the other walls, it's actually trying to pull the house apart. And so once the wind is allowed in through a garage door that fails, it's like blowing up a balloon too big, because now you not only have wind sucking out on 3 of the walls, but you have wind coming into that garage and pushing on them as well. So in Silver, we also have openings, not just garage doors, chimneys, gable ends, and attached structures. So porches or carports are all things that get strengthened in the Silver level of Fortified. And then when we go to Fortified Gold, what we're really focusing on is keeping the entire building intact with a continuous load path and making sure all of the openings are design pressure rated. So one of the things I'm not sure either of us have mentioned yet is that these levels build on each other. So you cannot build a Fortified Silver house that doesn't have a Fortified Roof on it. And you can't build a Fortified Gold house that doesn't also meet all of the requirements of Silver and all of the requirements of Roof. And that goes back to the first thing you can do to be more resilient is strengthen that roof. There is a hail supplement that is optional that can be added to either high wind or hurricane areas. It increases the impact resistance requirements of some of the components, but it is a completely optional addition. So with Fortified Roof, we really talk about it as 3 major steps: nail it down, seal it up, and lock it in. The first thing we do is nail it down. You heard in the video that what we use are ring shank nails. What those are nails with ridges in them. And we make them a little bit closer together than standard construction. This makes it much, much harder for the wind to pull your roof deck, your plywood or OSB, off of your trusses. And keeping those in place is so important. The next step is seal it up. So there we talk about that sealed roof deck system that I introduced a little bit ago. We have multiple methods of compliance to get there. In this picture, you're seeing Zip System, which is a proprietary OSB that has a built-in water-resistant barrier, and they have a tape system that goes with them. You can also tape on plain OSB and put an underlayment over the top there, or use a fully self-adhered membrane. There are lots of different options for compliance here, but the key is that we want to keep that water out if or when your roof cover fails. And then the final step is to lock it in. And what we're talking about there is using your drip edge to lock the whole roof system. And the drip edge is a piece of flashing that is right up here on the very edge of your roof that helps move water away as it sheds off of your roof. We have specific attachment requirements for those, including installing it over the underlayment, which helps tie that whole roof system together and really increases the performance overall. One really important note, and something we see all too often, is that Fortified never allows roofs with more than 1 layer of roof cover. Often you will see metal roofs installed over old shingle roofs, and they almost always perform very poorly. We see this way too often, this picture that's an example. So making sure that if you are re-roofing, the original roof cover comes off and the first layer goes on is very important, or the new layer goes on is very important. I forgot that these were in here. This is what happens when we're in the same room. So I already went through a lot of this detail. So we're going to skip right through those. So we're focusing on the roof today. Like I said, for silver, you would add in opening protection, attached structures, garage doors, and then for gold, you add in that continuous load path. And Alex is going to talk a little bit about the designation process.
Right. So you may have remembered back in the video where it was talking about that third-party fortified evaluator. That is really a key individual. We train and certify these folks, and they do inspections throughout the process of either re-roofing or new construction. And they do have a construction background, and they work with you as the homeowner or you as the home builder and any other contractors are involved. If you're building new, they're working with the engineer as well, and they're working with us. So they're sort of the key point person that's going to keep all of these things moving in the right direction. The home builder or the roofer, having a clear line of communication with that fortified evaluator is key because they're gathering what we call documentation, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. So once the project is initiated, either as a new project or as a re-roof, that evaluator should be contacted. The requirements are then applied either as the roof is redone or as the home is built. And then throughout all of that, we're gathering what we call documentation, which oftentimes is in the form of pictures. Now, the roofer or the contractor is allowed to take those photos. The key is that it has to be tied to your house, meaning that it has to have some geolocation or the address clearly visible in the photos that they collect so that we know it is your house and not your neighbor's house 3 doors down, because we want to make sure that your house has all the correct requirements. Other things they're looking for is things like material testing. Like a lot of the materials that we use, we're pretty material agnostic, but there are some specific testing requirements through other parties that we're looking for to make sure that that material is going to meet the standards and the high winds and the water intrusion and prevent that water intrusion. So that material selection is really important. And so they're documenting all of those things, and they are uploading that through, we have a software system that only our evaluators are able to use, and all of that comes back to us at IBHS. We have an audit team that reviews each and every single file, and only when they've looked at it and seen that all of the that everything meets the requirements do they issue what we call a designation at the end. And that designation is, well, I'll talk about that in just a sec. I mentioned the documentation, the photos, the product information. We also have compliance forms. So your contractor is signing off on what they installed. So that, and if you have a new construction project, the engineer is also signing off on what they designed so that everything adds up to meeting the standard. This is the certificate that we issue once we have checked and made sure everything meets the requirements. And this certificate is only issued to homes that meet the requirements. Now you'll notice it is issued to the address, not to the homeowner, which means it is completely transferable. So if you sell your house, the next homeowner will be able to get the benefits of that designation. It is valid for 5 years. Now, what that means is that after 5 years, it is eligible for redesignation. Now, there are some things that can prevent that from happening. Things like if you re-roof without contacting an evaluator, if you add solar panels and you don't contact the evaluator, if you swap out a door and you have a new home, all of those things might cause problems with the designation. So any changes that are made to the house, we really encourage the homeowner to contact that evaluator to make sure what they're doing is not going to affect their designation. The reason why we do a redesignation is because there's a lot that can happen to that house in 5-year time. Maybe it had some damage and there was a repair made. And perhaps your Uncle Bob did the repair and they're not licensed and they don't quite know what they're doing. So we want to make sure that Uncle Bob, if he is doing that repair, is contacting that evaluator and following the program requirements so that you can maintain that designation. Roofs are also a big piece of this, again, because we told you multiple times now, roofs are important. So we want to make sure that in 5 years, that roof still has 5 years viable life. So that roof's going to last you another 5 years before it needs replacing. Usually you can get about 2 to 3 cycles out of a redesignation before we may say, you know, your roof is looking a little bit aged. It may not last you another 5 years. You're going to have to re-roof before we will issue a new designation. Couple other things I want to point out, there will be a QR code on your certificate. The reason for that is that I jokingly refer to these as the golden ticket, because in Alabama, these have become so valuable that we have people that are trying to fraudulently reproduce these. And so ultimately, I do see that happening here in Louisiana as well. But that QR code will pop up your address so you can verify that that is a legitimate certificate. There will be an expiration date on there. After the 5-year period, we actually send out a notification to the address that says it's time for a redesignation, and that's when the evaluator will you contact that evaluator to come back out. Any evaluator can do the redesignation. All right, so I know we had, I know this is what everybody's sort of been waiting to hear about, which is the mitigation incentives, meaning what kind of incentives are available for you in Louisiana. First, I'll talk about at the national level. Louisiana is actually leading right now because all of the recovery money that's coming through, that's coming from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, all of those dollars are coming through, in your state is requiring that those structures, particularly multifamily, are built back to fortified, and a number of the single families as well. So HUD is recognizing it, FEMA is now recognizing it and is encouraging people to build back to fortified. And you can actually get extra money. If you get an SBA loan from the federal government after a disaster, you can actually get 20% more money if you build back fortified. So there's a lot of federal money that's tied to fortified, and they're encouraging you to build back a little bit stronger. In Louisiana, you do have some insurance discounts. They're scattered, but they're there. And there was just some, I'll talk in just a second about some legislation that was also passed. The Louisiana Fortified Homes Grant Program, that's another big item right now in Louisiana. I'll talk about that. There's also a mitigation tax credit, and we'll cover all of these things. So, the first thing I'll mention is that in this year, the legislative session actually passed some legislation that requires that every insurance company that is going to write insurance in Louisiana that is regulated by the state has to offer a discount. So there are no minimum discounts here in Louisiana, but they have to offer something. So that could be anywhere from 3% all the way up to 50%. And we do know that there are some companies that will offer that big of a discount. So that is coming your way, although that's going to take a little bit of time to get all the companies on board with that are currently writing. The other thing is there's a tax deduction for recipients, and I'll cover, I have another slide coming up that will cover that. But that is available as well, meaning that up to $5,000, you can actually get any money that you put towards a fortified roof, you can get some of that deduction. An additional, and then again, I'm going to cover a little bit more about the Fortify Louisiana Home Program, which is the grant program. I'll cover that in just a second. Additional legislation was that you may hear from your insurance agent that about what we call an endorsement. That means that for a little bit extra money per year, in some cases it could be as little as $50 up to $100, you can actually buy this endorsement, which means if you get storm damage, if you get storm damage to your roof, they will replace it with a fortified roof. So they will cover all of those extra costs. The couple other ones that maybe are key is that they passed some guidelines for manufactured housing and putting stronger anchoring there. And then a few other things that may be a little more complicated, but are definitely supportive of fortified in Louisiana. So we'll talk about the grant program in a little more depth. It will grant up to $10,000, that's up to $10,000 for homeowners to upgrade their roofs to re-roof to fortified. This is going to be what I refer to as a closed loop system, meaning there is absolutely nothing a homeowner can do in this very moment to make progress towards this grant. This is only going to be, you would only do things after you apply and get accepted. There are some eligibility. Mary mentioned earlier about foundation eligibility. There are a couple other home-related eligible things that the evaluator would be checking out to make sure that your home is able to be retrofitted and able to be designated. Has to be a primary residence, and You will be asked to verify that you have a homestead exemption, and then homeowners also have to provide a proof of wind insurance before they actually get that grant money. That money goes to the contractor, not to the homeowner, once the designation is completed, meaning that the contractor will get paid that $10,000 for on behalf of you, and then any additional money that roof would have cost. So let's just say, for example, if your roof costs $15,000, that contractor will get $10,000 from the state, but you're going to be on the hook for that additional $5,000, and you will be expected to pay that to the contractor. There is nothing you can do right now, as I mentioned. So getting estimates right now will not do you any good, because that is the program actually has very specific bid sheets that they're going to be asking contractors to follow. So the very first thing you're going to be able to do, very likely going to be October 1 is what we've been told. That is going to be the first time that you can actually, as a homeowner, take any actions towards getting a grant for yourself. So sit tight, and there will be more information coming. The Louisiana, you'll see the website there in the bottom left-hand corner. That's where you can learn more about this grant program, and I would say stay tuned. There is currently a button for homeowners, but it is not active. Right now, it is only contractors and evaluators that can register to work with the grant program, and it won't be until probably October 1st before homeowners are going to be able to apply. So stay tuned and keep visiting that site for new information. They have a lot of FAQs, which is frequently asked questions, that'll help you understand a little bit more if you have those right now about eligibility and what other questions you might have about the program. But we encourage you to contact the Department of Insurance if you have questions about the grant program specifically. It is coming from your state, from the department. And I just covered all of this. I apologize. These are brand new slides because that grant program is that fresh. So these are some of the other things. It is going to be a statewide program as well. So if you are outside of the coastal area, this is also going to apply to you. You will also have to receive a fortified roof designation. So that money will not be paid back to that contractor unless they are able to achieve that designation, which is why that eligibility in the beginning is so, so important. All right, that tax deduction, excuse me. So if you need a roof now and you go ahead and re-roof your home to fortified, you will get this, you are eligible for this tax deduction. You should ask your accountant or your tax preparer. It's equal to 50% of the cost paid or the incurred for the retrofit. You have to, again, have a homestead exemption, and it will be for no more than $5,000. But this is something that's available now, and if you are re-roofing, right now you can access this. This is also information that is available on the Department of Insurance's website. So if you want to dive in to a little more detail, they have that detail there. So a couple other benefits that are not specific to Louisiana, but in Alabama, we have seen that homes with fortified designations on average, this was a study that was done by the University of Alabama, I think it was Ole Miss and the University of Auburn. At some point soon, we hope that LSU will be able to sign on to that as well. But they found that there's a 7% increase in value for fortified homes. A lot of that is because they are more resilient and they also have better insurance. So that creates more of a demand for them, what drives that value up. That actually goes up into the double digits when you get into closer to the coast. So for any contractors that might be on the line today, or anybody that has construction background that's interested in becoming a fortified evaluator, we have some online training at fortifiedwise.com. And again, we do have some free training. So if you're a homeowner and you want to nerd out a little bit and get into a little more detail on fortified, we do have a couple of free modules. This is all broken down into self-paced modules where a homeowner or contractor can pay for the training, go through the modules at their own leisure. You have 30 days to go through them, and then at the end take an exam to get certified. The Fortified Louisiana Homes Grant Program that the Department of Insurance is putting out is going to require that this training, if you're a contractor and interested in participating, you have to be certified in both hurricane and high wind. So you have to take both of those courses as the roofer course. The evaluator course is on there as well. You also have to take both courses. And then if you're a homeowner and want to access the free modules, just for a little more information on Fortified specifically, you can also go there, and it's Fortified Fundamentals is the title of the free courses.
Thank you so much, Mary and Alex. That was fantastic. So much information. For those of you who joined us mid-presentation, thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm Danielle Del Sol. Thank you for participating. If you're not a member of the Preservation Resource Center, please consider joining us and supporting us. Memberships start at just $35 a year, and they support our nonprofit in our work to keep New Orleans authentic and bring you vital information and free webinars and lectures throughout the year, such as this one.